My interest in this topic was piqued by seeing the frequent post on Facebook of a friend of mine. She was posting videos and articles against women going to Sabarimala, after the Supreme Court verdict allowing women to do so. At first, I didn't understand this. What went through my mind was, how could you be against women going to Sabarimala? Wasn't the reason women were barred because of regressive ideas surrounding menstruation and purity? At least that's what I read off of articles on this issue that went down my Facebook newsfeed. It seemed like this issue was on one side, the government, Hindu women, and activists against a regressive Hindu tradition. But the actual outcome was quite different, and probably what the petitioners weren't expecting. It was the government, the activists, and the media on one side against the majority of Hindu women and the rest of the Hindu faith, as they seemingly don't want this and are against the Supreme Court verdict, as seen in informal surveys which show 75 to 90% of Hindu women do not support this verdict. They see it as an attack on their God and their religion. This is the same sentiment that can be seen in the multitude of protests against the Supreme Court verdict that has broken out. And their language is that they want to save Sabarimala. Better yet, 3 of the 5 original petitioners for the case have changed their minds on the issue. One of them, advocate Prerna Kumari, told the organizer that she did not have a better understanding of the customs or tantric traditions being practiced at the Sabarimala Temple when she signed the petition. These are a few statements of hers I'd like to highlight. At that time, I just considered the issue as a matter of gender bias. Later, I came to know about the real sentiment of women devotees, following a group of Hindu women launched a social media campaign with Ready to Wait campaign. She goes on to say, it primarily emanated from our ignorance about the diversity of Sanatana Dharma. As we have diverse customs and rituals here, the age-old traditions and beliefs must be prevailed in Sabarimala. Later on, it came to light that the impression which was given to me was not the factual position, and a large number of ladies are supporting the rituals, and they are ready to wait. A bit of a preamble to the other atheists watching, thinking, what's the big deal? Religion is all made up anyway, so why not just throw out the tradition? To them, I would say we need to be really careful about these things to avoid a slippery slope. Religion is always sacrificed at the altar of progress. Friedrich Nietzsche, who was famously one of Christianity's biggest critics, because he believed Christianity was the epitome of what he saw as slave morality, where weakness becomes virtue. He has a quote from one of his books, The Birth of Tragedy, I want to highlight. Here we have our present age, bent on the extermination of myth. Man today, stripped of myth, stands famished among all his past, and must dig frantically for roots. This is an interesting line. Science and technology has improved our physical lives immensely in many ways, but can the same be said about our psychological suffering in the absence of myths that imbue our life with purpose? As there is no pill or app to imbue our lives with meaning. This is an ever more increasing harsh reality we will have to confront in the absence of myths and thus religious systems. I'm an atheist that sees the utility in religion. They are very complex systems woven into our social fabric, with its own history, art, architecture, and a focus on the sacred. I don't believe in a literal God per se, but there are many useful things that come out of it. One example being, acting religiously does wonders for social cohesion. It probably is the best heuristic out there for that purpose. To illustrate this, let's use an example. Research by the anthropologist Richard Sozes shows that 19th century American communes, organized along lines of sacred rules and sacred objects, that is, religious lines, lasted much longer than more rationalist, secularist communes. The difference was staggering. At the end of 20 years, only 6% of the secular communes were left, as opposed to 39% of the religious ones. Religious systems aren't really rational, but are excellent for social cohesion. They appeal to our sense of belonging, so when you're trying to mess with them, tread lightly. If you do, people move on to imitations of religious systems, ideologies for example. Feminism being one which is pertinent to this issue. As the social scientist Jonathan Haidt puts it, religion, like morality, binds people together, but also in the process it blinds them to evidence and arguments that contradict the sacred values. So there is good and there is bad, for sure. Also, there is the in-group versus the out-group. Religious systems bind people within the in-group together against the out-group, which may be a good or bad thing, but on a societal level, this is why we need common values and grand narratives to bind us all together, which I find in India quite lacking. We're divided, unfortunately, in a million ways, and we need to start coming together. So to start, let's talk about what the Sabarimala issue isn't about. It's not about menstruation. Let me repeat that. It's not about menstruation. This was a very clever reframing of the issue by many media outlets and activists. How they do this is they talk about the ban of women being between the ages of 10 and 50, which is the menstruating age, and they link this with the argument about how menstruation is considered impure. And they make it seem like this is the reason why women aren't allowed into the Sabarimala temple. Well, this isn't the reason. This is a false narrative, and I'll explain why later in this video. If menstruation was the reason, I would be on their side, but not for the same reasons. I do believe menstruation isn't a reason to bar women from entering temples, and my reasons for that I will explain in my next video, so please hold judgment till then. But briefly, it has to do with disgust being a moral emotion, and how it was useful for us to link hygiene with morality in the past. What changed primarily in the present day was technology, but the interesting thing is, through the use of language, the reframing has been normalized. You see this when you see the term women of menstruating age, women of menstruating age, women of menstruating age, repeated anywhere this topic is discussed, and pretty much by everyone. Next, the question is exclusion anti-woman? Let's flip it around for a second. There are temples that have certain restrictions on men entering at certain times. They can still enter, but at certain times they cannot. It's conditional. There are also festivals that men don't take part in. Now, are men being discriminated against by being excluded from these? I don't think so. I wouldn't argue that. It's similar in Sabarimala, where entry of women is conditional. It isn't that women aren't allowed. It is women between the ages of 10 and 50. I believe originally it was supposed to be younger than Ayyappa's mother, but they needed a fixed age group while writing it into law. There is a disease in society these days that believes men and women should be the same in every regard. This is the result of certain toxic ideologies that think society is purely socially constructed, and any differences between men and women must be due to prejudices and discrimination. They start with that assumption, and then everything becomes a petty zero-sum game. Men and women who weren't competitors thus become competitors. With that in mind, let's go over the reasons why there were certain rules that didn't allow women of a certain age group into the temple. The temple at Sabarimala has a particular deity. According to Padma Pillai, a spokesperson of the Ready to Wait movement, the head priest of the Tantri of a temple brings in the deity through his mantra and through the power he has acquired over years of practice. He brings a form of the Parambrahma into the Panchabhuta form, which is a stone brought to life by the Tantri. The Tantri is then given a message in his mind by the deity about what the god's wants and needs are. Thus he creates the mantras for the dhyana of the temple. The followers then take a vow in front of the deity that they will uphold this, and that is why the deity agrees to sit there and give darshan. It is a contract of sorts between the deity and its followers, and if the contract is broken, the temple may lose its purpose or meaning. Also, the form the deity takes is depending on the tantras through this process. Even though the tantric rites are the same to invoke Ayyappan as seen in other temples, the interpretations are different. and hence Ayyappa has many forms in different temples. This is core to Hinduism and why we see a huge amount of diversity amongst deities you see in Hindu temples across the nation. Now, regarding the deities' wants and needs, there is a story here. To put it briefly, Ayyappa killed the demoness Mahishi, thus ending the demoness's curse, which included having the face of a she-buffalo, thus liberating her. After the demoness's death, she assumed her original form, that of a beautiful woman, and she asked Ayyappa to marry her. But Ayyappa was a Nashtika brahmachari at Sabarimala, which is loosely translated as an eternal celibate. He has taken certain oaths, of which includes not seeing or touching a woman. This is the issue. It's not about the god being able to control his urges around women, like is being disingenuously reported by certain people. His oaths are broken by just seeing a woman. Now do you see the issue with the menstruation argument? Ayyappa, trying to keep his oath, where he doesn't want to see or touch any woman below his mother's age, which was codified later into law as ages 10 to 50, has nothing to do with whether menstruating women are considered impure or not. That's not the argument at all. Ayyappa also told Mahishi that he would marry her when no first-timer, Kani Ayyappa, comes to Sabarimala. Ayyappa knows all year new Kani Ayyappa comes to Sabarimala for darshan. This was a form of refusal of her marriage invitation. Mahishi checks every year if this is upheld, because if it isn't, Ayyappa has to marry her. But each year she is disappointed. Still, due to Ayyappa's esteem for her, she was assigned the status of the mother goddess. It is Mahishi who is worshipped as Maligapurat Am, translated as the mother goddess on the tower, in the shrine to the left of the Ayyappa temple. Ayyappa is the son of Shiva and Mohini, which is an avatar Vishnu. Ayyappa is believed to be a much more recent reincarnation or avatar of Dharmashastra. Dharmashastra manifested himself in various forms, and it is believed that Manikantan was the specific avatar he took to kill Mahishi. This is why the term Dharmashastra is used in a lot of rituals at Sabarimala. This creates conflict and discussion, as Dharmashastra is a god that has wives who are Purna and Pushkala, whereas in this newer incarnation, he is a brahmachari. People still argue if Ayyappa really is a brahmachari due to the claim that his human form, Manikantan, merged with Shastra at Sabarimala, and thus he's not a distinct entity anymore. Well, to that I would say that idea is in conflict with how it is being practiced at Sabarimala. According to the temple authorities, the Tantris Rajaviraru and Mohanararu, Tantra does not permit women of menstruating age to enter the temple, as the idol has been installed, treating the deity as a perpetual bachelor. So there you go. I think that would take precedence. So here's a few questions for Hindu women who want to go to the temple. Did you know the story? Did you think it was just a place to pray to your god? If you went to the temple, wouldn't you be going against your own god's wishes? If you went, wouldn't you be helping your lord break his vows? Is that something you want to do? This personally doesn't make sense to me. Maybe it is. Maybe you don't care about that. Or you don't believe that aspect of the story. Maybe over time it becomes common for both men and women to go, and the purpose of the temple will transform into something else. I don't know if that will happen or can happen in this case, but I can see how some people could see that as a preferential outcome. But this is at the possible risk of losing everything of meaning there. And Hindus should have a very serious discussion if whether that is a risk they are willing to take. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. You see, a temple isn't like a church. When we think of a church, it is a place to God to pray. But the God doesn't live there. We pray to God up in heaven, but he is omnipresent. This is not the case in Hinduism, where it is common to have local traditions where certain deities actually live within physical spaces like that of a temple, and certain deities can have different forms in different temples. This is the case here, where the Sabarimala temple is the abode of Lord Ayyappa's brahmacharya form. So what if he cannot stay there as an eternal celibate? What happens then? Would he just leave? Or would he transform into something else? That's an honest question. I have no idea. Even if he didn't believe a god actually lived there, his followers believing he lives there and he has that form is a very powerful thing. It fills a possible empty shell with meaning. It was also reported that there was no tradition of women of a fertile age not being allowed into Sabarimala until the law was put into place in 1991. Some people argue that this tradition was a recent thing. This is clearly not true though, as books and journals from the early 1900s mention this tradition specifically. For example, the Man in India Journal, volume 9-10, published in 1929, mentions how only girls and old women are allowed to go on pilgrimage to Sabarimala. Rahul Ishwar, a member of the temple's tantric family, also claimed that he has with him records from the British era, dating back to 1812, which show that in a survey conducted then, it states that Sabarimala Temple had banned entry of women falling within a particular age group. Historian M.G. Shashibhushan claims that even if women had come to the temple in the past, it is only until the 18 sacred steps that they didn't climb it. Apparently, this is also the case for the rice feeding ceremonies and the visit of the Travancore Queen. Now, there are cases where special VIP treatment was given to some people, but these were incredibly rare incidences. For example, T.K.A. Nair mentions how in 1940, his mother entered the shrine for the rice feeding ceremony. Although he admits his mother may have entered through another entrance and not through the 18 sacred steps. Also, apparently film stars have entered as well. According to a comment I saw online by a Praveen Sharma, apparently the petition in 1991 was filed because the petitioner claimed that special VIP treatment was given to certain women by the Devaswam board and that the temple was opened for all women during monthly pujas. This all started after the temple was rebuilt in 1950, and there is no evidence of the practice before the 1900s, at least according to the claim of this person. But at no time were women allowed during the Mandalam, Magaravilaka, and Vishu seasons. This fact has been confirmed by even Mrs. Chandrika, the ex-Devaswam commissioner. Apparently, the entry of young ladies in the temple during monthly pujas is not against the customs and practices followed in the temple. Now, if anyone can double-check if that is true, please let me know. This does seem like an old tradition, at the very least, and women actually entering is a much more recent thing and quite rare. Overall, I was curious to see how this issue would unfold. The institutions of the Supreme Court, ideological activists, and the media versus a religious faith, one which is the dominant faith in the country. Hinduism, which seems to be under attack quite often these days by subversive elements within our culture. What concerned me is the use of ideology, extreme ideology. For example, I see the word patriarchy used everywhere. It was in debates, in news articles, and even in the Supreme Court, as we saw with Chief Justice Deepak Mishra's statement where he mentioned the term. This term patriarchy is not taken seriously in the West outside of feminists in academia and the media. Rightfully so, as it is a radical far-left ideological term that has a very skewed perspective on gender relations of the past. It has a Marxist element to it, where it repackages class conflict theory as conflict between men and women. And it has a post-structuralist element to it, where the assumption is built in that this patriarchal system is purely socially constructed, and biology has no impact on behavior in this regard. An argument based on the debunked blank slate hypothesis. A better lens of history would be men competing with other men, women competing with other women, for each other. And the ways they do this is through a mix of differing sexual selective pressures, social influences, technology, and biological pressures influencing culture. A mix of all these things. Now, this requires much more of an in-depth explanation, which I will do in another video. We have a really bad habit in India of copying over some of the most extreme ideology from the West, instead of the good stuff. And through certain institutions of power, that being academia and the media, it has permeated throughout our culture so thoroughly that it has made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. This to me is troubling. Most of the statements I saw from the judges were fallacious, to be honest. It was more extreme ideology than rational thought. I will go over them if you want me to. Just send a comment. But I want to highlight the only person on the bench that made any sense to me. And ironically, this was the only woman on the bench and the only dissenting judge, Indu Malhotra. She stated, issues of deep religious sentiments should not be ordinarily interfered by the court. On gender equality, she states, the right to gender equality to offer worship to Lord Ayyappa is protected by permitting women of all ages to visit temples where he has not manifested himself in the form of a Nashtik brahmachari, which apparently there are thousands of them. So it's not like women are barred from praying to their Ayyappa. It's just in one temple. Well, I'm always trying to see if there are hidden uses for religious practices, and in this case, something Anjali George talks about on the Sham Sharma show on YouTube was quite interesting to me. She claims the whole pilgrimage is something to keep men in order. The Vratam teaches men how to behave. They have to control their thoughts, control what they eat, and separate themselves from worldly desires. Through this pilgrimage, Ayyappa helps them to see the divinity within themselves. This pilgrimage is something they need the help of their wives on, because it's not easy to do, and thus is a community kind of affair, where he needs the help of his family to maintain his vratam or vow. Anjali claims men ask permission of their wives before they start this pilgrimage. It seems to me to be a pretty alright tradition. There's no malice here or seeing women in a lesser light. It's just a tradition for men to achieve moksha. Women have their own ways to do it within the religion. Do I believe this tradition should be maintained? From what I have read, I would be for keeping the tradition, and it seems this is what most Hindu women want as well. But I think this is an issue for the Hindu community to decide, especially Hindu women, as they are the ones affected, in conjunction with the tantris, and not for outsiders with vested interests. If women are allowed, it may not be a bad thing. Religious practices there may transform into something else. Whether there will be a better or worse outcome, I do not know. I don't have prescient knowledge, but I do know most religious practices were once based on something else. So religions can transform, but there are obvious risks involved, so we have to be careful. Due to the Supreme Court's verdict, women are allowed to go to Sabarimala, where the law is concerned, but devotees are trying to bar women from entering the temple. Police are arresting devotees in the thousands, and it doesn't look like things are going to settle down for the time being. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear petitions seeking to review the court's verdict on the 22nd of January. So let's see what comes of that. Either way, I'm hopeful this will be resolved sometime in a good way. I wanted to mention one more thing. Some women activists and their supporters had their property damaged. Violence and destruction of property should not be accepted, no matter which side of this debate you fall on. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please do share. If you have any topics you would like me to speak about, please send me an email at the ID in the description. Thank you.